Welcome, everyone. Today, you're not just hearing another book breakdown. You're stepping into a hidden room, one that most people never even realize exists. A room that reveals how humans truly are, not how they want to seem, not what they post online, but what they actually think, feel, desire, fear, manipulate, and conceal behind their carefully crafted masks. This isn't a feel-good story or a self-help fantasy. It's reality, raw, unsettling, and powerful. Once you understand it, there's no going back. This book has changed millions of lives around the world. It's studied by entrepreneurs, psychologists, artists, leaders, even intelligence agents, because it unmasks the one invisible force behind everything we do: human nature. Why do people turn on you after you've helped them? Why do you chase the same kind of heartbreak again and again? Why do you destroy your own progress when success is finally within reach? This book exposes the patterns behind it all with chilling precision. And here's your warning: once you see these truths, you can't unsee them. You'll recognize manipulation instantly. You'll stop craving approval. You'll stop trusting the wrong people. You'll finally understand why the world works the way it does and how to protect your peace while winning in it. If you want emotional mastery, mental strength, and the kind of awareness that makes you unshakable, listen closely, because today you're not just learning, you're waking up, and there's a bonus. This video will sharpen your English too. It's packed with clear, powerful language, emotional storytelling, and real-world lessons that make complex ideas easy to understand. As you follow along, your vocabulary will grow, your grammar will flow more naturally, and your mind will expand with life-changing insight. This isn't just language practice, it's transformation. Let's begin.
He woke believing the day would obey reason, yet the first choice already belonged to a feeling. A cyclist brushed too close. His chest tightened, and a courtroom opened in his mind. Before the verdict formed, the elevator mirror showed a locked jaw and tired eyes. He remembered a rule he had written on a quiet Sunday and named the weather inside: anger, fear, fatigue. The message he had meant to fire never left drafts, and the morning loosened by a notch. She had been buying notebooks to purchase motivation, yet the covers always worked alone. This time, she set a small contract with herself: 10 lines before any screen. After a week, the pages carried clumsy, honest progress, and the notebook stopped being a talisman. She left the phone in another room, and the need for quick applause faded like steam from a cup. A night shift nurse had reached for sugar at 2 in the morning because grief begged for sweetness. She drew a map of cravings and found the trigger was a silent corridor, not hunger. She changed the route by 5 steps, poured a paper cup of cold water, and hummed the tune her father once whistled. The craving still visited, but it knocked first and waited on the mat. An analyst refreshed a red dashboard until catastrophe felt inevitable. He wrote 3 verbs for the sprint on a whiteboard and asked for proof that doom existed. One shaky metric failed the test, and attention returned to the call he had avoided. The hour stopped pretending to be disaster and became a list he could move with a pen. A barista felt a sting each time a certain customer stacked a complicated order like a dare. He placed a tiny blue sticker on the espresso machine as a private signal. One breath through the nose, one through the mouth, one glance to the door to widen vision. The rush became a river instead of a storm, and he noticed an elderly man fighting a lid. A simple assist reset the room. He had bought expensive running shoes to outrun an old unease, then left the box under his desk like an altar to avoidance. A 2-day rule forced the box to sit in sight before money could leave for good. On day 2, he returned it, laced the worn pair, and ran 10 quiet minutes that counted more than any purchase. Minutes replaced miles, and identity shifted from finisher to the person who showed up.
A teacher kept a smooth river stone on the desk. When irritation rose, the stone held it, not her voice. She tracked supports given instead of offenses made. A pattern emerged, and a small intervention lowered the noise of the room. The class became a place where mistakes composted into growth. A violinist scanned comments after a performance and felt one dismissive line grow fangs. She opened a folder labeled Baseline and listened to a recording from a year earlier. The gap forced reality to speak. She wrote a measurable weakness and drilled it for 12 minutes. Sleep returned like a tired friend. An engineer had fed himself headlines before dawn and called the result awareness. He replaced the habit with a porch ritual and wrote 3 sensory facts from the last day. Steam from soup, rain softening asphalt, laughter from a neighbor's window. The attention diet shifted from imported urgency to local truth, and the morning obeyed. A warehouse supervisor believed volume created safety until a pallet tipped. He installed a small decibel display for himself and treated it like a speedometer. Lower numbers brought fewer injuries, clearer instructions, and steadier hands. A copywriter reached for candy whenever a deadline approached. A simple chart revealed that the craving peaked when the task was undefined. She wrote one sentence that described done, and the jar lost half its power. Drafts arrived on time without a war. An entrepreneur micromanaged design because ambiguity threatened his control. He imposed a rule that the first 10 minutes of a weekly review belonged to silence from him. The team solved problems he would have grabbed, and the product grew into shapes he alone would not have imagined. A mother heard a crash in the kitchen and felt alarms from childhood surge. She touched the cool tile, named 3 visible objects, and caught the citrus in the air. Proportion returned. A cup was just a cup, and the child learned that mistakes did not summon storms. The same physics had ruled all these rooms. Emotion arrived first like weather, and thought followed like a broadcaster pretending to command the sky. Small props, plain rules, and humble rituals widened the pause between spark and wildfire. In that pause, ordinary acts rewrote the day, and the mirror they had searched for finally appeared on the inside. He had learned to pause, and then he began to study faces as if they were garments stitched in a hurry. The city still applauded performances, yet he searched for the seams. A senior manager had showered a junior with public praise during meetings, then erased his name from credit slides when clients arrived. The seam appeared on the day the junior won an award. The manager's smile thinned, and congratulations became silence. A list of promises in email looked perfect, while calendar invites told a truer story of exclusion. He marked it as pattern, not mood. An event planner had built a reputation for kindness, but the caterer's assistant noticed who received the last hot meals. Influential guests ate first. Temp staff ate, if anything remained. On a stormy evening, a delivery driver arrived late and apologized. The planner returned to the stage with a gracious tone, yet the driver left unpaid until morning. The seam was simple. Generosity vanished when status did not reflect on her. A startup founder preached transparency in company memos, and then scheduled decisions on Friday nights when dissent tired quickly. He posted photos of team hikes and mental health days, while contractors waited 90 days for invoices. Under deadline pressure, his language softened in public channels and sharpened in private notes. Finance sheets revealed that late fees cost less than goodwill, and the mask of care slipped along the bottom line. A couple posed as a monument to harmony. In restaurants, they touched hands and spoke about gratitude, yet the dog avoided one of them, and the plant houses near a specific window remained neglected. When schedules changed at the last minute, brittle laughter replaced ease. Their friends could not explain the tension, but the grocery receipts showed separate carts, separate plans, and a growing ledger of small resentments. An online educator sold balance and discipline, yet her assistants watched the dashboard spike at midnight. She posted sunrise routines she rarely kept. When a sponsor arrived with a larger check, her critique of brand values softened by noon. The seam revealed itself in two numbers: follower growth and sleep deficit, always moving in opposite directions. A barbershop owner posted about community, then charged walk-ins an extra fee while regulars received discounts. During a power outage, he promised to call the elderly first for rescheduling, but the first calls went to influencers with cameras. The neighborhood still praised his charm, yet the apprentice who swept the floor understood the order of loyalty. A teacher celebrated curiosity on posters and penalized late questions with sarcasm. A single month of tally marks exposed the truth. Praise flowed toward students who echoed her views, not those who tested them. After seeing the marks, she adjusted grading rubrics, and the room grew quieter in the best way. He began to test masks by removing the audience. He noticed how people treated cleaners, receptionists, and waitstaff, how they behaved when elevators closed and no one recorded anything, how they acted after small losses. He kept 3 measures for every person he let near his plans: consistency across settings, behavior under pressure, and the time it took for words to match actions. The world still performed, yet the seams stayed visible, and the cost of misreading them felt greater than any inconvenience of patience.
He had begun to notice how certain days folded into the same shapes. The pattern did not ask permission, it simply returned. A young lawyer always sprinted through the first weeks of a case, then vanished into busy work when the work turned dense. The hook had been praise. He chased the rush of being called brilliant and fled when the task no longer produced applause. He created a scoreboard no one else could see that counted only deep hours and the flight reflex weakened. A marathoner trained with zeal, then sabotaged herself with late nights and heavy food the evening before long runs. The hook had been fear of proof. Success would confirm that potential had become responsibility. She replaced the night before ritual with a fixed menu and a phone placed in another room. The loop began to creak at its hinge. A chef ran a bistro and promised himself he would not explode during the dinner rush. Yet the same minute each night his voice rose and plates slammed. The hook had been childhood chaos that taught him loudness equaled control. He taped a small thermometer near the pass that displayed kitchen heat and used it as a proxy for his own. When the number crossed a line, he performed a 2-minute reset with cold water on the wrists. Burns declined and staff stayed. An investor clicked through news feeds and made the same impulsive trades each quarter when rivals announced wins. The hook had been comparison. Identity leaned on beating a name on a screen. He wrote an if-then rule before markets opened. If envy surged, then positions could only be reduced, never added. The quarter ended without panic entries, and his calendar contained more reading than regret. A nurse dated people who mirrored the first person who had left her without explanation. The loop repeated with eerie politeness until she mapped the moments she ignored. The hook had been silence. Any delayed reply felt like destiny she must obey. She drafted a boundary plan in calm hours and followed it when the old quiet returned. The pattern did not vanish, but she stepped out of its path.
A designer loved the thrill of beginnings and abandoned projects at revision 5. The hook had been perfection dressed as standards. He created a dull ritual of shipping ugly drafts to a trusted folder every Friday. The drafts accumulated into a history that embarrassed him into momentum, and clients began to stay. A teacher graded late into the night and promised to start early the next morning, then woke exhausted and angry with herself. The hook had been the fantasy of a heroic catch-up. She set a hard stop and a visible end-of-day checklist that fit on a note card. Sleep returned, and her patience in class no longer cracked at small interruptions. A son cared for his aging mother and repeated a monthly cycle of overpromising, collapsing, and drowning in guilt. The hook had been an old vow that love equaled self-erasure. He scheduled 2 non-negotiable hours each week that belonged to repair rather than sacrifice, and informed the family in a plain update. The guilt did not disappear, but it lost its throne. He saw that loops were not moral failures, but mechanical habits fused to old rewards or old alarms. He learned to record the minute before the mistake, the body signal that always arrived first,
the sentence he tended to believe without evidence. He understood that breaking required replacing, that subtraction alone grew back. He stacked friction in the path of the impulse and laid down glide for the choice he wanted. Timers shortened the window for rumination. Menus narrowed decisions when willpower ran thin. Anchors, like a stone, a sticker, or a checklist, pulled him back when memory lied. Each time a loop threatened to close, he looked for the hook that invited it and loosened that hook by 1 practical inch. Over weeks, the prints on the path changed shape, and the part of him that had felt doomed to repeat past scenes began to trust that a different ending could be rehearsed into muscle.
He had noticed how the mind assigned halos to what hid behind velvet ropes. A limited sneaker drop sold out in minutes and suddenly looked essential to people who had not wanted it the day before. He watched a colleague ignore a kind partner for months, then become obsessed the week the partner pulled away. A recruiter dangled a role described as almost impossible to get, and the same duties that sounded dull last year began to glitter. The pattern repeated across rooms and screens. Scarcity painted ordinary things with myth and turned patience into hunger. A copywriter kept refreshing a store page that displayed one phrase in red, "Only 2 left." The price had not changed, the quality had not improved, but her pulse increased as if someone were stealing air. She printed a single question and taped it above her desk. If this were always available at this price, would I still want it? After sleep, the answer on most mornings had been no. The heat cooled without drama, and money stayed. An art buyer attended a gallery night where a curator whispered about a private list. Pieces with average craft began to look like tickets to a tribe. He forced a reset by moving 3 paces back and rewriting his checklist in a notebook. Composition, story, longevity in years instead of likes. The canvas that survived those tests had no waiting list attached. He bought it and still liked it when the buzz passed. A woman chased a cold texter because replies arrived rarely and unpredictably. The irregular rewards mimicked a slot machine and trained her attention to kneel. She wrote a rule during a clear hour that responses could not determine her day, and that investment would match reliability. She then measured consistency rather than charm. Interest decayed on contact with real numbers, and she reclaimed hours she had been gifting to silence. A restaurant owner believed that a velvet rope would raise perceived value. He created a 12-seat chef counter and published only 6 seats each night. The room filled, yet regulars complained about wait times, and the kitchen began to bend itself into shapes that served optics rather than taste. He tested the opposite for 1 month. Transparent booking, no invented scarcity, a modest price for a fixed menu that rotated with farmers. Revenue stabilized, staff morale rose, and the dishes tasted like food again instead of marketing. An engineer kept adding tasks because his calendar looked empty and he feared being seen as replaceable. He manufactured scarcity of time by scattering focus, then wore the stress like a badge. He inverted the signal and created deliberate gaps called clear lanes that he defended with the same force he once gave to fake emergencies. Scarcity now served recovery rather than theater, and his output improved with fewer tasks. A content creator learned that hinting at disappearance produced spikes. Last chance posts inflated metrics while exhausting the audience. She replaced the trick with a cadence that honored attention. Episodes arrived at the same hour each week, and an archive stayed open for anyone to begin any time. Growth slowed at first and then hardened into loyalty that did not crumble when the algorithm yawned. He turned the lens inward and asked where he himself had been careless with availability. He had replied to messages instantly, given extra work for free, and accepted meetings at any hour. People valued what he left last on his list. He designed 2 quiet instruments, office hours for generosity and a response window that batched replies. Access became structured rather than scarce, and respect rose without games. He discovered that scarcity seduced because it promised a shortcut to meaning. If only a few could have it, it must be worth having. He learned to subtract the spotlight and judge the object on dull merits. He pretended the door stood open and the shelf stayed full, and then listened to desire after sleep, after food, after a walk. If the wanting returned with the same weight, the choice earned a yes. If not, he let the phantom pass. In room after room, the glamour of the unattainable faded when measured against usefulness, endurance, and peace. And the energy saved by refusing the bait made room for the rarest thing of all, a life that did not need to borrow glow.
He had measured progress in bursts and discovered that bursts collapsed. The day he shifted to a longer lens, choices rearranged themselves. A line cook practiced one knife motion for 15 minutes after every shift and logged the number of onions cut without waste. By spring, his hands moved silently, and orders left the pass ahead of the ticket times. A jazz student recorded a single chorus daily at 60 beats per minute, then at 63, then 66. 6 months later, he heard how his timing had thickened like muscle. A junior developer wrote one doc string for each function touched and left a breadcrumb for his future self. The team's bug count fell because yesterday's clarity paid today's bills. He had once chased speed with caffeine and screens and woke thin as paper. He replaced late scrolling with a closing ritual of 3 lines: what he did, what he noticed, and what mattered tomorrow. Sleep deepened, and the morning carried weight. A runner stopped training for medals and trained for Mondays, laces tied at the same hour, regardless of weather. 10 minutes in rain became 30 in sun, and endurance arrived like a shy guest who stayed once invited politely. Money obeyed the same lens. A freelancer diverted 10% of each invoice into a boring account named Runway and treated it as rent for future calm. When a client vanished, the panic did not. A teacher stopped grading heroically at midnight and adopted a 45-minute block after school with a timer and a standing desk. Her voice the next day no longer cracked on small disruptions. A violin maker sanded one surface each evening and refused to rush glue. The instrument sang true, because impatience never touched the joints. Relationships bent toward the near unless guarded. He scheduled a weekly walk with his oldest friend and left the phone at home. Rain allowed. The talks repaired tiny tears before they became rips. He set a practice of choosing the person who brought quiet rather than the one who brought drama, and the house sounded like a harbor instead of a harbor siren. Health
needed the same stubborn gentleness. A nurse prepared Monday and Thursday meals on Sunday nights, so future versions of her did not bargain with vending machines. A former smoker counted streaks on a calendar, but measured pride in hours resisted after a bad day. Relapse no longer erased a month, it ended an hour that ended then.
Work strategy changed color. A founder stopped announcing deadlines and started publishing roadmaps with margins. Features shipped slower at first and then stopped returning like boomerangs. An analyst forced every tempting trade through two hurdles. Would this be wise in a year, and would I teach it to an intern with my name on it? Half the clicks died at the threshold, and the portfolio breathed easier. A college student broke a thesis into index cards and assigned each a tiny proof. The stack moved like an ant colony, invisible until the hill existed. He kept two ladders in view. The short ladder gave a tangible win today. The long ladder built a structure tomorrow could live in. Each afternoon he climbed one rung on both. One email that cleared a block, one paragraph that clarified a concept, one invoice sent, one page read from a manual older than his career. The lens lengthened further when he asked questions that ignored applause. Would this matter in 5 years? Would this hold after a loss? Would this make a stranger's day slightly easier? Answers trimmed urgency like overgrown branches. He understood that long-range thinking did not hate the present, it fed it. Small rituals created compound quiet. Tools grew honest names. The calendar carried recurring blocks labeled maintenance, not magic. The to-do list held fewer items and heavier ones. What he once called discipline turned out to be design, and what he once called luck looked a lot like interest earned on choices made when no one was watching.
He had kept the window shut for years and wondered why the air felt heavy. When he finally slid it open, the room accepted weather, sound, and truth. A street musician practiced 2 rooms away and missed notes unapologetically. The mistakes traveled in and taught him more about courage than any book. He began to arrange his days around what would still matter if the window stayed open and nothing could be hidden. A photographer in his building had stored prints under a bed, convinced no one needed another view of ordinary faces. He chose 10 frames and pinned them to a cafe wall without ceremony. An old woman stopped under the 3rd frame and touched her scarf as if recognizing a version of herself. He saw that finished meant shown, not perfect, and scheduled a small release each month, whether or not bravery arrived on time. A nurse recorded 60-second messages for her children before dawn, 1 voice note a day that captured the smell of rain at shift end, the lesson a patient had taught her, the gratitude that survived exhaustion. Weeks later, the messages formed a map of a life that had not been postponed. She no longer waited for a grand trip to say what mattered. The morning's minute became proof she had loved with both hands. A developer left a contract that paid well but leaked peace. He built a tiny tool for a clinic near his old school, a boring dashboard that showed missed appointments and transportation gaps. Cancellations fell. A mother with 2 jobs stopped losing her spot. He understood that scale did not equal meaning. Usefulness did. A teacher replaced performative optimism with anchored boundaries. She kept an index card labeled Keep and another labeled Close. Each month she closed one door that drained her, from a chat that wasted patience to a committee that honored status over service. The act looked small and felt explosive. Space reappeared, and with it a steadier voice. A violinist who had chased applause started chasing tone. She set a rule that each practice ended with one note held until breath demanded honesty. The note exposed tension she had painted over with speed. After a season of quiet labor, her sound carried a warmth that made strangers pause at doors. He wrote 2 lists and pinned them inside a cupboard. 5 people he would invest in regardless of convenience, 5 skills that would matter after headlines changed. Every Sunday, he moved a single pebble under each name or skill to mark contact or practice. The childlike ritual protected priorities from the noise that once commanded him.
He treated energy like currency, with an exchange rate that punished waste. He set office hours for generosity so that help remained real instead of resentful. He answered messages in windows rather than in chains that cut days into confetti. He protected 3 blank zones on the calendar each week where slow work reclaimed its rights. He folded mortality into planning without drama, a simple sentence at night: if time were shorter, would I keep this plan? Sometimes the answer ended a project the next morning. More often, it tightened aim. He began to favor repairs over replacements, letters over posts, walks over performances. The room felt less decorated and more lived in. When success finally knocked louder, he tested his footing. He asked for dissent in writing, set caps on travel, and gave credit forward. Praise arrived and left. He worked anyway. The mountain in him learned to become rooted rather than tall, to prefer seasons to spikes. He stayed teachable when attention tried to harden him. He practiced a softer strength that did not confuse kindness with surrender. He said no without apology, yes without spectacle, later without guilt. He extended grace to those who were learning and distance to those who refused. He discovered that firmness without heat traveled farther than fury, and that empathy with edges guarded the door better than suspicion. He no longer measured days by noise, but by repairs completed. A broken chair fixed for a neighbor, a recipe cooked for a friend who grieved, a document written so the next person would not suffer guesswork. The tally felt ordinary and tasted like purpose. He had stopped auditioning and started belonging to his own hours. As the windows stayed open, masks lost oxygen,
and the room welcomed only what could breathe honestly. The people who drew near spoke with their actions. The projects that survived served strangers. The habits that remained made space for sleep, for laughter, for the kind of silence that returned strength rather than drained it. He had not escaped the world. He had attuned himself to it. Those who watched him live began to recognize themselves. They understood that the mirror they had chased in other faces had been waiting on the inside. They saw that time was a finite grant, that tenderness and discipline could live in the same body, that a life could be built from small, brave inches arranged daily. They had not just consumed ideas, they had faced the weather of their own rooms and chosen windows over armor. And when the choice repeated tomorrow, they would lift the latch again, because this was never about being ready. It was about waking up to the one life still in their hands and using it before the light moved off the floor.
Thanks! Please subscribe and like. Spin a new yarn with us every week. See you there!